So yes, we've got welcome councillors to this workshop. As I advised, this is the workshop that, as a result of the resolution in October, with regards to a presentation on water security and resilience prior to the end of the year. This is being recorded and will be put out on the council's website after this presentation. So we've got Ashley Greenwood, our Deputy General Manager Operations, and Craig Salmon, our Manager of Water Services, here to present, and I'll hand over to Ashley to start the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark, and thank you, councillors, for joining us today. So, look, you'd recall back at the October meeting there was the notice of motion from Councillor King, and there was a resolution of council to bring a workshop, a presentation back to a workshop for yourselves before the end of the calendar year. We did have a further workshop on that same October meeting where we were talking about the IWCM and water supply options, and I guess this is really an extension of some of that information. We've just tried to better structure that to address the specific items that are listed in the notice of motion. So you can see there on that first slide, that's essentially just trying to set the framework to take you through it. So obviously you can see there, as noted, there was a NOM that was resolved with council in October 2023, and then we'll just go through a slide deck. So again, looking at service needs, looking at water security, and so on and so forth. I would just state at the outset, a bit like we alluded to at the workshop back in October, a lot of this is managed and facilitated through the Integrated Water Cycle Management Plan that we're currently going through a review of at the moment. That's very much the broad overarching process and strategy for local government in New South Wales to manage a lot of these things, and then we've just tried to unpack in the slide deck as we go through where those linkages are, just to help yourselves and the community understand how we're going to speak to the issues. So at this point in time, I'll just hand over to Craig to take us through the slide deck. Again, it is a workshop presentation. We encourage questions so that you've got a stronger understanding of the issues as we work through the slide deck. So maybe I will just speak to this one. Again, this is a very consistent slide with what was presented previously around Bellingen Shire Council. We are the local water utility, and we're responsible for undertaking long-term strategic planning around water services. And again, they're basically stating that the Integrated Water Cycle Management Plan is that key process. Again, just some key points. It's a 30-year plan that looks at integrated water, sewerage and stormwater supply scenarios. So it's looking at water as a resource, not just water as in potable water out of the tap, but it does go and look at water as a complete resource. It's looking to obviously encourage less reliance on natural water sources. So basically, you're just trying to manage your resource in a sustainable way. And again, as stated there, we're currently reviewing the IWCM in consultation with Department of Planning and Environment. So it used to be DPIEs, you might have referred in previous reports, now changed its name to DPE. So that's basically one of the lead agency on behalf of the New South Wales State Government in terms of managing the water resource. And there's a hyperlink at the bottom of that slide. If you have a look at it, there's a presentation that was provided which provides a high-level summary of the IWCM process, which you can read at your leisure at another time, which just helps to understand a little bit how that's developed. So next slide, Craig, and I might just sort of hand over to yourself. You might just
get there. Yep.
Yeah.
You don't have to do that. You just highlight them.
We're probably going to wish we didn't swap some of the images around, Craig, so you'd have to keep moving, Councillor Fenton. But again, integrated water cycle management. So again, the key priority outcomes is defining your level of service framework. So it's linking objectives, service standards, performance indicators around security, quality, sewage management and water services. A 30-year total asset management plan. So it's very much about what's our community growth, what is our demand going to be into the future, what do we need to do from an asset perspective to manage that. So very much providing a very long-term horizon around asset management. That's then backed by a 30-year financial plan, which runs in parallel to that. And that's about helping council to understand what revenue they need, obviously to facilitate what's coming out of that asset management strategy and meeting our level of service. Just bear with me, councillors, as I mute that. So that's obviously another key indicator. It's about us setting our fees and charges, because you would recall that the water and the wastewater businesses are separate businesses. They're sort of constrained funding sources, so they have to operate independent of council's general fund. So it needs to be considered separate to that. And then obviously as part of an IWCM too, there is the 5-year drought outlook and contingency emergency response plan that gets developed as well.
So, sorry to interrupt you. The current plan, is it 30 years old, or has it been updated before that? And does it address all of these issues within that current plan? Yes.
So the IWCM basically goes through an 8-year review cycle. So every 8 years it goes through a full complete review. And then in the interim period, I think every 4 years, there's a bit more like of a desktop analysis, isn't there, Craig, just to review that there's no major changes and that, your financial projections and the like are still kind of fit for purpose. But it's an 8-year rolling cycle that we go through and do a formal review. And that's part of the process we're going through at the moment.
The 30-year capital works program and asset management plan, that's updated and reviewed annually.
Okay. And is there someone that reviews that externally, or is that just done internally?
Just to take that point, the annual elements that we just do that ourselves internally. In terms of working through the 8 and the 4-year cycles, that's very much done in partnership with DPE as the managing authority, I guess, from a state perspective, because they've got the responsibility for the water as a resource across the state. So they very much work in partnership with them. And honestly, in a lot of what we do in terms of day-to-day, even on major project-related matters, like as sewer and coastal villages, they're a key stakeholder for us in making sure we manage that water resource.
The IWCM has to be sent to DPE for concurrence. Like, they won't accept it unless you send it to them, and they gave us concurrence for the first stage, and then when we finish a strategy, we'll send it to them for concurrence again. And once we've got the concurrence from them, then council can adopt it.
Yeah, and there's a push, isn't there, for that to be part of the IP&R planning framework, because it's separate now, isn't it?
It's separate.
Yeah. So there is a push to get that into that same mechanism.
Yeah, certainly there could be a mechanism that reporting goes back through an IP&R process. I guess in terms of an IP&R reporting, we're already reporting on the water and wastewater businesses. We report on projects and on corporate indicators that relate to that function. So there's already some coverage there. There may be some linkages around how any IWCM updates are reported through that process. I'm not privy to the exact details, but it could be something that's facilitated.
Oh, look, I think there is a push, and I think it's because it's a bonus to council not to have to do, that outside of that framework. It's an extra cost.
I might hand over to Craig. So again, these are just some sort of specific slides, sort of talking to each of the, I guess, the dot points that were raised in the notice of motion. So I trust you sort of find that helpful. So I'll just hand over to you, Craig.
Yep. So in our service needs, especially in the IWCM and the business plan, we've got a comprehensive list of water supply service objectives and targets, and that relates to minimum pressure, flow rates, interruption times, notice given for planned interruptions, all that sort of stuff. All these targets relate to water supply security, the drinking water quality, the reliability of the supply. The service level targets can be found in the strategic business plan and the IWCM business paper, but basically we need water to be available all the time. We can't not supply people water for a day or 2 days, so we need to have 24/7, 365. It's got to be safe. Interruptions have to be minimised, and water restrictions have to be minimal. I mean, in a further slide, there is an actual best practice target for the amount of water restrictions we're allowed to have. So, water security. The recent aquifer study has indicated that there's 23.5 years water stored in the aquifer. Dorrigo has Rocky Creek with a backup, which has about 1 year's storage. It will take some silt.
So Craig, can you just explain what that means, 23.5 years water stored? So does that mean that if there was no inflow into the aquifer, there's 23.5 years worth of water at our current consumption rate within the aquifer?
Yeah, there's usable water, they estimate in the aquifer, there's 24,000 megalitres of water stored in our aquifer. we average 1,000 to 1,200 megalitres a year, so it equates to 23.5 years. That we still need to prove that, which is why we're in the process of installing monitoring bores up and down the aquifer, so we can measure during low flow periods or low rainfall periods what the level in the aquifer is doing, and what, as we pump, what effect that's having on it.
So how long is that expected to take till that is known?
They would like 5 to 6 years of data just to give a whole spread across dry periods, wet periods, and just to average it out. So once they've got that 5 or 6 years of data, then they'll plug it into their modelling program and get a much clearer view of the aquifer. With the limited data that we gave them before, they were able to reconstruct what they think's accurate in the aquifer, but without this additional data, they can't say with certainty this is what is in the aquifer.
So I guess maybe just for members of the community, if they're obviously just observing this online, it's important to understand we do already have some existing monitoring bores. We're now doing additional monitoring bores which are on a bigger footprint to better understand the way that the aquifer's responding in terms of us then taking consuming water out of it. So I guess to give some context, the current monitoring bores are in reasonable proximity to the production wells, which is where we're getting the water out to send to the Bellingen water treatment plant, and then that goes off to coastal communities. So the future monitoring bores are a broader footprint. So it's about understanding, as you're taking water here, what's the resulting level doing at a different place. So that broader modelling through additional monitoring bores gives you a stronger understanding of, you know, how the aquifer is responding to that demand, if that makes sense to everyone.
So we're going to be going from 3 monitoring bores to 13 monitoring bores.
So I'm just wondering then where they've pulled that figure out. I mean, 23.5 is quite an exact number, and now we're saying that they have to prove that yet. So that's, I have a little bit of a concern about that number. Also, the data that was done to bring that number, do the councils have access to that?
So that number itself was off the back of, there was, I think it was Parsons Brinkenhoff that did a groundwater study some years ago. So there was, I mean, that
when
data.
you're saying some years, actually.
I'd have to get the specific.
5, 10?
Oh no,
I
probably.
think Parsons Brinkenhoff did a study in the 80s.
Yeah.
And they did like pump down tests and draw down tests, 24-hour pump tests. And then WSP, which is a derivative of Parsons Brinkenhoff, has done some more work. And then DPE did some modelling on it to get that figure. It's all in the...
That was recent though, wasn't it, Craig? That the last one was done by DPE.
Yeah, that was completed.
So yeah, access to that study. Can councillors get access to that study?
Yep, certainly. Yep, certainly. You can give that to councillors if it hasn't been already. Councillor Fenton, you got a question?
Yes, thank you. I just interested, going back, Craig, to what you said about the water restrictions only being able to be on for 5% of the time. The restrictions are based on triggers in the physical system. So you absolutely can't control how many days a year that's triggered. How do those two things marry together?
Well, that's the best practice rules, which we would like to achieve, but to achieve that, we would have to put in a backup water supply, like off-stream storage or connection to Coffs Harbour or desalination. But it might, once we complete this aquifer study and fully model it after 6 years, we may be able to get those restrictions changed, because they're based on flows in the Bellingen River. Now, if the aquifer, as they expect, is completely separate from the Bellingen River, the flows in the Bellingen River shouldn't be affecting our water uptake. So, but without doing this study, you can't approach NRA and say, can you please change those water restrictions levels and flows in the river.
But you're quite correct, Councillor Fenton, that obviously the current restrictions are related to riverine flows. And as Craig is saying, we've got better science around the capacity of the aquifer, which, as has been suggested previously, is not directly related to the visual flows observed in the Bellingen River. Then there may be a mechanism that we can say to NRA, can we change our licence conditions or our trigger point, which may then help us to better achieve a reduction in water restrictions, because it's not directly related to observed levels in the Bellingen River.
And so the 5 to 6 year time frame, has that been decided by some scientists or by DPE that that's the time frame required to have, you know, scientifically robust data?
Yeah, it was the consultants, WSP, who were doing all the monitoring boards and everything. That was their recommendation, and it was DPE's recommendation as well, that 5 to 6 years of data should give them enough to accurately.
So if I can just clarify, the most recent study was only completed in the last 18 months.
That's correct.
So that's where we got the 23.5 years worth. The monitoring boards is going to validate that figure that's been there. So obviously they come up with it based on evidence. However, they want to get more data to validate that. It's a bit like when you're doing these research type things. So it will take that 5 to 6 years to then be able to validate that, which will hopefully then allow us to go to NRA to ask for a change in our trigger points, should we decide to ask for that change, if the data is actually accurate.
So yeah, another question now in terms of the water restrictions. If Dorrigo's got a year's storage, they should have a different water restriction regime than what the valley is if it's got supposedly got 23.5. Really, you know, if that because they're quite separate. So if you had the water restrictions are lifted in the Bellingen Shire, you'd be a little bit more concerned if that was happening and the storage in Rocky Creek Dam wasn't, was sort of dropping. So how would you deal with that? Would you have a separate conversation with Dorrigo? Because it sounds like
I think that's something that we need to consider in this update of the integrated water catchment management plan that we're doing now, because for ease of use, they're linked together at the moment. But you're exactly right. The two water schemes are not linked, and so therefore they probably should have different regimes around water restrictions.
So have we ever thought about increasing the size of Rocky Creek Dam? Because if Dorrigo's only got 1.5 years, Bellingen's got 23 years, and we do have a couple of years of no rain, what's going to happen with water in Dorrigo?
So I guess
you're not going to pump it up the mountain.
No, I guess the commentary around Rocky Creek is that's the alternate supply. So the direct supply is the riverine supply out of the Bealsden.
Well, that was nearly stopped running when it was raining, not raining this time.
So we don't have any cease to pump restrictions. Correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, on the Bealsden. There used to be historically, but they were removed for us as a local water authority. I haven't been here obviously any greater than 3.5 years, so I don't know what the legacy may have been if there was ever any need to cease to pump from the Bealsden historically, Craig.
Yeah, the Bealsden used to have a trigger point of 20 megalitres a day.
But now it doesn't?
Now it doesn't. I mean, it does for irrigators and other people, but not for council. They've removed that. So we periodically had to go from the Beals down to Rocky Creek.
Yeah, but I mean, I anecdotally know people have said they've got soakages and springs on their farms that totally stopped running in September, and they hadn't even stopped in 2018-19 dryness. So I think that we need to look at. I know we've looked at. There's been like studies done to put off-stream storage in the Bellingen Valley, but there's never been anything done up there in Dorrigo. Maybe we need to look at that.
I think the basis behind that was basically a year's storage up there, and Dorrigo being one of the wettest places in the state.
I get you, but this workshop's about, what happens if the worst happens.
Yeah. I mean, you probably wouldn't build off-stream storage in Dorrigo. There's a lot of deep basalt water sources there, underground water sources. We should probably use to maybe pump into treatment plant or refill Rocky Creek.
Okay.
But has there been any work done?
Yeah,
about
have we looked at that?
We've we've drilled some monitoring bores in the water table up there, like the deep basalt, but that was not for water consumption. That was when we're going to do reuse irrigation on the farm across the treatment plant. So we're just monitoring conditions, but we do have some data on the bores up there.
I think that's something for us to also talk with DPE and Public Works Advisory around the formation of this most recent review of the integrated water catchment management to make sure that I guess plan B for the Dorrigo community is somewhere incorporated in or is incorporated into it.
Well, they did look at it in the OWCM, but they didn't see any need for augmentation up there. But it's something we can plug in there.
Push further. Yep.
So that picture there is digging a test bore down near the current infiltration well. So with the 634,000 we got from the state government, some of that money was to install a new high yield production bore in case the infiltration well fails, because the infiltration well was installed, I think, in the 30s. Then it was updated in 82, like only the top, and the pumps were updated in 82. But if that happens to fail, it supplies about 65% of the seaboard's water. So we're installing next to it as a backup. We can't use it at the same time, but next to it as a backup, a high capacity bore that will have about a 50 litre a second. So that is going out to tender to the drillers at the moment. The design's been done, so that should be installed early next year. The grant didn't include money for pipes and pumps, but we'll get a boat once it's been designed, or once it's been installed and the flow rates tested. We'll then go out and look for prices, and then hopefully install that in the next financial year.
So that's just strengthening redundancy around supply, because we've got older infrastructure, and it's a good mechanism to give us some strength and resilience around that continuity of supply.
Water quality. So all councils' water's got to comply with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. It's not legislation, but I don't imagine it'll be too far away before it will be legislation. As part of that, we send samples from our reticulation every week to the Department of Health to ensure the water supply is safe. We do, I think, 3 samples a week in Bellingen, 2 samples a week in Dorrigo that simply look at fecal contamination in the water. And then 12 times a year in Bellingen and 2 times a year in Dorrigo, we send it off for a chemical analysis, which looks at all metals and nutrients and colour and all that, just to ensure everything complies with the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines. On top of that,
Is that what's on the water portal? That we can see all that data?
Yeah.
So if I could, just on that question, we've included some hyperlinks there in the slide decks. So one takes you to a frequently asked questions page around water quality, which answers some questions. And then if you go to the second hyperlink, which is actually in the water portal under the documents section, and you scroll through that page, you can see all the water quality results. When you look at it, just be mindful that that's always being reported on in arrears. So if you're looking for 2023 data, for instance, you might only see 2022. It's a matter of when it's reported back to us. So it's in arrears, but it still gives you a history of our water quality findings.
On top of that, our operators 7 days a week test for chlorine levels, fluoride levels, turbidity, pH, all that sort of stuff, just to make sure our water's safe all the time. In the the Dorrigo is pumping out of the Billsdown, so when you get a bit of rain up there and flushes down, the river gets quite dirty, and that can upset the treatment plant. So we installed an online turbidity meter at the Billsdown water pump station. So if the water gets above a certain turbidity level, it just shuts the pumps down till the river cleans up. So we got low and high level chlorine alarms. It's monitored 24 hours a day. So if chlorine gets below 0.3 milligrams per litre, which is a lower limit, it sends the alarm to the operators that are slow. If it gets to 0.2, it sends out a low alarm. And if it gets above 1.5, it sends out a high alarm. So the operators, any time of the day, they'll get an alarm, something wrong with the chlorine at Bellingen or Dorrigo, and they can go out and fix it straight away.
So again, probably just around water quality. So the main two treatments are chlorination and fluoridation. Okay, now probably just to help you understand, like Craig's alluded to, with riverine supply, like up at the Beilston, you've got to deal with the turbidity issue. When it rains, the water gets dirty. It's not as problematic, obviously, with bore supply because you're drawing from the aquifer, so you're not dealing with those same challenges around turbidity. So that itself makes the supply cleaner, in inverted commas, than a riverine supply, which is always subject to environmental factors.
And we got a grant about 12 months ago. The Dorrigo and Bellingen water catchments were classed as high risk, level 5 was the highest risk for cryptosporidium and giardia. So they gave us a grant to do a design and tender documents to improve that, which it's likely it'll be some sort of UV disinfection and filter turbidity online monitoring. That was went out to quotes last month. It should be, it closes on the 6th of December, so we probably should be awarding that work in early December, and it has to be completed by the end of May next year. So if the government announces another round of funding, we've got a shovel-ready project to upgrade our treatment plants.
So just for want of explanation, so UV basically relates to, you've got very high intensity UV discharge globes, and your water supply goes through essentially a clean pipe and gets exposed to intense UV light to basically kill the bugs. Yeah.
I mean, we've never had a recorded case of giardia.
Why high risk?
Well, because of what's in the catchment, especially in Dorrigo, like you got a lot of cattle farming up there. So your filter, your sand filter should get rid of it all. Bellingen, I'm not so sure. I've had a few discussions with them about why it's a level 5, considering it's out of an aquifer. But I think they were saying, well, you know, could be from the river, but...
So it's not from data that they've accumulated from testing?
No, it's just a risk assessment matrix they just use for every single LWU.
So just probably just as a bit of an aside, but water quality can be a tricky issue because the measures are not set by council, it's independent of council, and those authorities can change their mind on occasion. So in a previous LGA where I worked, that was a situation in Queensland where Queensland Health changed the levels, and we went from having no reportable incidents to some suppliers being on a boil water notice until we rectified it because they changed the measure. So we just need to be mindful of, I guess that's what this project is about. There could be some changes and we want to be prepared for the change if required.
Can I just clarify, you said you had a grant. Was that just to work out what we needed, or was that to actually go ahead with the work for the UV?
It was to go ahead with the detailed design and tender documents. So
we haven't actually got any money to do it. We just had the money to design it.
Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. I wanted to ask you about the rolling kind of thinking is 5 years ahead, but what's your feeling about what 50-year ahead planning looks like? Is it the same, or is this all that communities can cope with right now as thinking I guess on the current climate model rather than what we might do when it gets more hectic?
I think Councillor Fenton on that, the IWCM is actually a 30-year look forward, which is, I guess, pretty standard when you're talking about water systems and water planning. Yeah, we're not quite at 50 yet, but the IWCM that will come before council in the next sort of 6 months will actually have that 30-year time horizon. And there'll be some extra dates that Craig will sort of show council at the end, but with regards to once that's in place, what the updated timeframes are around some of the other strategies that need to be put in place to then make the IWCM come to fruition over that 30 years. But as we've said, it gets I guess a desktop review every 4 years and then a solid review every 8 years, and we're at that solid review period at the moment. So it's not like there's some things that are done in a 5-year look forward, but the major strategy is actually a 30-year look forward, and that's why I guess there's things included in there around off-stream storage and connection to COFs or whatever it is to actually look at that and what's needed over the next 30 years, not just the next few years.
As part of the IWCM issues paper, they do something called a secure yield analysis, and that basically looks at our stream flows, our weather, our usage, our consumption, and also takes into account the latest New South Wales state government climate model. So they actually model our secure yield over a 30-year period to take into account climate change.
Could I just follow the follow-up question? So the DPE, they kind of advise about the higher level climate planning? Are they your main guidance as council staff, or is there other organisations supporting through that process?
Mainly DPE that we deal with because they're our regulators, and they give us guidance, and they're involved in writing legislation and policy in relation to climate and water supply.
Right, again, Craig.
So that reporting coming from them, is that freely available online?
Which report?
You know, it's talking about what risks are in the, in terms of the secure yield for us. Because I've heard that they took out the last 2 droughts when they were doing the water sharing plan, when they were talking about how much water's in the system. So they said they were anomalies in the system, and then we're going to base it on the last 100 years. Is that similar to that?
I'm not sure how exactly they do the secure yield analysis, and a lot of their climate models, they don't give us access to them. We did have a briefing a couple of years ago on what their climate predictions were for river flows in this region. I mean, that was confidential as well. I mean, I didn't get to keep anything from it, but the outlook wasn't that like the Bellingen and the Bealsdown's going to get a lot drier. There might be a few more peaks and troughs rather than a consistent flow, but it wasn't a bad outlook for our region. The rest of the state, not so much, but for our region, it wasn't too bad. But yeah, I don't have access to all the state government climate modelling. So environmental impacts. Running the water supply, I mean, there's very few environmental impacts generated by this. The biggest, I guess, potential risk is if we get a big trunk main that breaks next to the river, you can potentially, if there's low flows, get chlorine toxicity, which can be detrimental to marine life, but we've never had a case of it so far. And if the Bealsdown gets to near stopping, to save environmental flow, we just move to Rocky Creek.
So just to give some context around that too, councillors, so with the main break, when you dose with chlorine, and chlorine basically engages with any bacterial type matter that might be in there, so it basically dissipates, and obviously the further it goes along the system, the more dilute chlorine becomes. So it also depends on where that break may be in terms of that risk. If it's very close to the water treatment plant, there's going to be a higher level of chlorine. If you're at the other end of the line, that risk is mitigated because the chlorine's been doing its work in terms of that water supply before it gets to that point. So, there's some context around that risk too, but as Craig has said, there's never been an issue with that here, but it's certainly something that has a potential of sorts.
So, Craig, if I can just ask a question around the Bealsdown River and Rocky Creek Weir, how often in the past has council had to pump from Rocky Creek Weir because of low flows in the Bealsdown River?
In recent, we haven't pumped from Rocky Creek for probably 5 or 6 years. But potentially long. I mean, we do turn it on just to check.
Yeah, but
I mean, when I first moved here, it was maybe every couple of years we'll pump up from Rocky Creek, like in that August, September period when the flows in the Bealsdown got down to below the 20 metre triple point.
So I guess what I wanted to just show there, council, is that even though Rocky Creek Weir's only got that 1 year's worth of supply, that we don't utilise it on a very often basis. So from a backup perspective, yes, if the Bealsdown's not flowing, we've only got a year's supply, but it's not very often that we actually have to use it for that purpose. I think that may get worse with climate change, the way it's going and that type of thing, but I guess that's, I think in the longer term planning that we need to make sure that we've got some opportunities to, as Craig has sort of talked about, recharge it from some aquifers or bores as well. So that's something for us to consider. I just wanted to also make that point as well, and that may be why at the moment DPE or Public Works hasn't put in that secondary type of source.
Could I just say on that environmental impacts? I mean, it's such a broad statement. I think, you know, if you're focusing on what our water system does to that, then it's probably quite small, saying, as Craig said, if there's a leak. So, I suppose that to me that also talks about things like what are the impacts on bushfires on our water supply, what's the impact of clear fell logging in areas of high rainfall. You know, we've just spoken about cattle in the river, that's an environmental impact, and we're just hearing that we're at a level 5 for things like cryptosporidium. So I would say that they're in terms of a broader impact of the environmental impact. And it might also be those things like, you know, what does it do in terms of biodiversity? So it's a broader statement, but I understand that, you know, we're trying to narrow that down, but I think it's got to be a conversation. What does it look like when these other things happen in our catchment? When we're talking about our water supply, we should be talking about the catchment, not just our river system. So I think it's a broader conversation, and we're probably not going to get to it today, but I think it's something that we need to think about in that 30-year plan about, you know, what are the things that we can do actually to minimise that risk. So things like working with land care, which we do in terms of riparian repair, the work that we do around river systems and stuff like that, that should be acknowledged as well. And what does that best practice look like? You know, how do we ensure that we're looking after those things like the wetlands that are in those rivers? You know, our aquifers, where are they, you know, across the landscape, and what are the impacts of agriculture in terms of pumping? Because I don't think there's any gauges at the moment on stuff that's been drawn out of the river. So I think that's something that's coming. It's supposed to be done now, so it's going to be metered. Is that right?
Yeah, every
2025.
Every extraction or farmer or anyone who extracts water, apart from domestic use, has to have a water meter installed, which is tamper-proof with a data logger that can send water to DPE.
So that's now. That's current.
I thought
it was 2025.
I think it's 2025. I think we're the last region to get it done, so I think it might be 2025 for here. So, I mean, that should help with people during low flows, especially on the Bealsdown, because you know there's some irrigators that are taking water out past the cut-off point.
And I suppose it's always, you know, in the Water Directorate they talk about, you know, where the priorities sit, and really safe and secure town water probably should be the highest priority. And I know all those other things are important for people, but we've got to make sure that those things are in place if it's going to get drier, because it's going to be tighter and tighter. And obviously, Dorrigo is a concern now in terms of having 1 year's supply. You know, thinking about predictions of what we're heading into in terms of our needs. So, yeah, I think the environmental impacts is a much broader thing that probably needs to be fleshed out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Councillor King, because we've sort of come at it from, you know, we extract and we treat and we deliver, but then it's like with the water getting to that point with our sustainable environment and waste team, you know, there's there's that other piece of work that happens on that side of it, which is about managing, I guess, the broader catchment, which ultimately supports that service. And what does that look like?
So the system capacity, capability and efficiency. So Bellingen water treatment plant, it's got a 10 megalitre a day capacity. And our current peak is about 5.5 megalitres a day. So there's a lot of spare capacity there. And there is potential in a 30-year capital works program for an additional production core. So we can actually increase that 10 megalitres a day if we actually need to. Dorrigo treatment plant has a 2.7 megalitre a day capacity. In the peak days, they're about 650 kilolitres a day, and that's probably during mains breaks and a lot of water extraction. The average usage in Dorrigo is about 250 kilolitres a day.
Mm-hmm.
So we've both got spare capacity, but to get, not for Dorrigo, for Bellingen, if we wanted to increase the capacity up to 10 megalitre a day, we just have to do some minor chemical dosing pumps, like upgrade the chlorination system, update some line dosing pumps, but it's all fairly minor to get that maximum capacity out of them. All our pumps, they're sized and optimised for efficiency. We've got soft starters in them. We never vary the pump speeds in this. We don't need variable speed drives to drive it up and down, but the Bellingen and Marks Hill reservoirs now, we've upgraded our SCADA and we've got an additional reservoir in Bellingen. We're going to be looking at off-peak pumping. So during peak loads, morning and evening, we're going to look at not pumping any water. We should have the capacity to pump at night and maybe top up in the middle of the day. So that should save us some money if we can go to off-peak pumping and take some load off the grid.
Save money through energy costs, you mean?
Yeah.
So time of use metering, which will save us quite a lot of money.
Yes, at the moment, I mean, the electricity costs for the Bellingen water treatment plant are just quite significant. And with the price increases, it's costing a lot of money.
So is that something that can be addressed partly with photovoltaics? Is that something that probably should be in the conversation around?
No, the pumps. We already have photovoltaic pump solar panels down there at the moment, but like the pumps, the Bellingen, the Marks Hill pumps are like the 160 kilowatt pumps, and the Bellingen ones is
You can't start them, can you? It's starting those pumps that takes all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I guess in response to Councillor King's question, yes, in recent years we have done some work since Lucy's been on board around increased photovoltaics on water and wastewater facilities to try and offset some of that demand that we do. I mean, we are a big power user in that space, but the reality is not any real practical technology other than large scale solar farms sort of offsets relative to the demands that those pumps are putting on in terms of electricity demand. They're just big electricity users.
And hopefully with that PPA that the council considered at the last meeting and has approved for us to enter into, that's all green power that we're looking at. So yes, we won't be necessarily generating it ourselves, but at least we're buying green power.
It's not free.
Not free, no.
So the main risks and challenges for the Bellingen Shire Council water supply. So I guess up top there is contamination of the aquifer or the river. I mean, if there's contamination in the Bealsdown River, we can switch over to Rocky Creek and the contamination is washed out. If there's a contamination of the aquifer in Bellingen, it creates a lot more issues. If the contamination is in the aquifer and the river, we'd have to get in emergency desalination until we can determine an alternative source, because I think if the aquifer actually was contaminated, it's going to stay contaminated for so long.
Yeah.
So has there been any study, any work done around possible sources of contamination, what those risks are?
The main risk would be, I guess, a semi-trailer overturning on waterfall way and dumping a load of toxic chemicals into the land, because the aquifer's only 6-7 metres down and soaking into the aquifer.
It's hard to control.
It's very hard to control.
So Craig, a lot of the infrastructure for the desal plan was, we got a grant for that, didn't we? We've got that stored somewhere, is that right?
Yeah, we've got all the pipe work and tanks all stored at the moment.
Yeah.
So all we need to do, well, you have to hire a generator and just get the desal plan in and plumb it in.
So just to understand for councillors, so for that emergency desalination plan, which I think our community is very aware of, that's a containerised system. So what that related to was an emergency supply. You bring it in, it's a containerised plant, so it looks like a shipping container. You plumb it in, you plug it in, and you fire it up. And then that's how you provide it. But it's not necessarily a permanent solution. So we have been talking about those water supply options reports, and there was all those different options discussed previously at a workshop with council, and Craig alluded to a couple at the start of it. Desalination in that, which would may be considered as part of the IWCM strategy, that would be a permanent desalination option if that was pursued, and that obviously has some very clear cost considerations, because obviously once those plants are built, one of the challenges with desalination is you've got to continue to maintain them because of the complex filtering arrangement with them. So just be aware of the difference when we talk about that desalination option with what the community's aware of versus maybe what may feed into the IWCM strategy process.
And the biggest challenge is would be costings, because your brine discharge. In an emergency situation, you can discharge it into the river downstream of the butter factory. But if you've got a permanent desalination plant, it's going to be running more often. You'd have to pump the brine all the way down to the mouth of the Bellingen, rivers or close, and only release on a
Outgoing tide.
I think that shows the importance of getting those monitoring boards happening as soon as possible. And when, I guess in 2018, 2019, when the emergency desal plant was under consideration by council, the information around the aquifer at that point in time was not known. So it's really important that we do get those monitoring boards in place so that we've got the ability to see what is happening to the aquifer separate to what's happening to the river. We don't want to go down the track of putting in an emergency desalination plant if the aquifer's still got 10 years worth of supply or whatever it is within it. So I think that's why it's important that we get those monitoring boards in place, which will give us that certainty of water security.
Back to the contamination, one of the boards produces water that's full of iron now, so you don't use it.
Yeah, that's
you can't figure out where the iron's coming from.
Yeah, that's bore 2. I mean, all the bores are close together, but bore 2 right in the middle. It's got a massive iron concentration in it. It's not in any other boards, not in the well. It's only in that one spot. If you turn it on, we've had to turn it on previously, but you can't leave it on because people start ringing up. I'm washing them on, my clothes are rusty.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that goes a lot to say, doesn't it, about the science of aquifer and understanding of aquifers is so limited. Yeah, which is sort of when we spoke about, we've got a 23.5 year supply. I'm like, yeah, I mean, because that's the complexity is you don't know the quality of the water, you don't know what you're going to get when you start to run down certain parts. So, I mean, because if that number was seen in the community, everyone would go, oh, well, we've got nothing to worry about. We're 23 years of drought and we can still be pumping and we're all going to be okay. And I think that's not the true indication of what's going on. And the science of aquifers and their potential is still not an exact science. And I know that's what they're absolutely saying within the New South Wales Water Directorate is there's some measures we're getting out of DPE that possibly are talking about best case scenario rather than the reality of what we might be facing. And I think that's an important thing for us to remember as well.
If I could just comment to that, Councillor King, I think the important thing that then flows beyond that is for our community to really take ownership of the issue about water resilience and not just look at those numbers and say, I don't have to care about it. It's actually for each member in our community to think, what can I do to make a difference in the way that I use water and not be wasteful in it, regardless of whether restrictions in place or not. And I've honestly found in the time that I've been here, people quite respectful in that regard. I don't see people being particularly wasteful in terms of water consumption, in terms of a domestic basis, but that's certainly, there's a broader part of this conversation. It's not just about our ability to supply, it's also about how do we influence the behaviours within our community so that, you know, if people want to introduce water tanks themselves for non-potable uses or whatever it may be, what little steps can people take to help us manage the issue of water security more broadly?
I think that's a fair point, but also following on from what Councillor King was saying, if we've got this 5 to 6 year time frame where we have to undertake these investigations, that's quite a long time. I mean, should we also be looking at modelling what is the plan B during that time?
So I guess in terms of the 5 to 6 years, largely is basically to give you, I guess, the climatic variances over a period of time to see. That's the 5 to 6 years is not so much about time to analyse data, it's to give you a review over different climatic periods to better understand how it performs over the longer term. I mean, I don't know, Craig, if you can comment, we can start looking at data earlier to understand what it is, but I guess the 5 to 6 year period comes from they're trying to pick up a wet spell and a dry spell and something in between to then better model the overall capacity. But I certainly take your point, what's in that intervening period whilst we're doing the science, I guess.
Well, not just that, but if you get to the end of the 5 to 6 period and the worst case scenario, as Don said, you find that, well, the water quality is not what we thought it was, it's going to get to a certain point and you can't use it. Well, then what is plan B?
Well, I think
so we're going to wait 5 or 6 years to think about it.
No, and that's why the IWCM actually has secondary options within it. So it's not about putting all the eggs into one basket. What it's doing is the monitoring boards are going to give us a bit more knowledge around the water security with the current, I guess, source of water that we've got. But the IWCM also puts options forward for council and the community's consideration around, okay, if that one isn't good enough, then what's the next plan? So it is certainly looking at into the future, what is the plan B? So it's certainly not leaving it for 5 or 6 years, but that's the discussion, I guess, what we need to have as a community, as an organisation. Which of the plan B options is the most acceptable to the community and affordable to the community as well, because none of them come with a small price tag.
Well, it's also looking at the low hanging fruit. I mean, as you said, the community here, and I would say widely, it's not just, it's not something that we have to hang on, has an understanding that water is a valuable resource, but not to the point of, where I think we should be. And I think that's a really important conversation with the community. And I think that sort of gets watered down when we go, water restrictions are on, water restrictions are off. Because people go, well, when it's on, I can just splash it around. So I think, there's those other things that we can do in that interim period as well to say, how can we strengthen that up? I mean, wouldn't it be great for us to say, this is how much water we're using across the Shire? Wouldn't it be great if we could get that down to such and such in 2024 as a challenge? I don't know. I mean, they're the things I think we also need to realise. And we got really good at that when it was really dry, but we've sort of gone back the other way. And I think we've had a bit of rain too, and everyone's like, oh, we're right. But, one of the terms that we're hearing now being thrown around is things like flash drought, which is that you can have rain and then 4 weeks later you're into a really hardcore drought. And I think they're the things that we need to be thinking about as well, because we're getting those extreme temperatures. So, it is. No, it's all right.
And with those monitoring boards, they'll be hooked up to our SCADA. So we'll get data every day on what's happening within the whole aquifer. So we don't have to wait for it to be modelled. We can actually follow the trends live on what's happening in the aquifer and relate that back to rainfall or droughts or whatever. So we can actually see live what the actual aquifer is doing.
Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, I feel like this list of key risks and challenges should start with climate variability and change, because it really is interwoven through all the others. But I think that's something we need to be really explicit about, that this is the biggest challenge for the species and every other species on the planet right at the start. Yeah, and reading through that list of risks, I'm interested in the staff shortages around, you know, that difficulty of attracting and keeping staff regionally, and I wonder what is being done around the inequality that we have around access to workforce as regional communities, and what can be done, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, look, thank you, Councillor Fenton. Look, we're not on our own in that respect, as I'm sure you completely understand. There's certainly a lot of conversation happening around that at a state and probably even more broadly a federal level, I suspect. But certainly when we've attended conference material and there's been presentations from Institute of Public Works Engineers of Australia and the like, there's certainly a lot of advocacy and discussion happening around how we keep attracting more skilled workforce into regional areas. There's a lot of conversation about better accessing skilled migrant workforce and the like to try and do that. Certainly we as an employer, I think I can reasonably say, are always very open to whomever's making themselves available for consideration for any employment opportunities here. We're trying to think outside the square about how we do that. But it is some very real challenges in this part of the world at the moment because of the large capital works program. I think there's an ageing workforce in local government to a degree, and we've seen people post-COVID sort of stepping away or modifying their work hours. So it remains a challenge that's not just ours to solve, but certainly for local government on a much broader scale.
Can I say, Ashley, with that, the Water Director, which the Bellingen Council obviously is part of, have just, with DPE and the Education Department, worked through for the first time to actually have a course that's been delivered. It used to be done by TAFE, but then there was no one. And there was a couple of private ones. They've actually got to the point now where they've got that, so you can actually start to train people up. And I know there's a lot of push for those sort of cadet roles or school-based traineeships, which I think we should be looking at, with a population of young people that are hanging out for jobs that are going to be full-time and secure in some way. So I think it's good. It'll be a good thing for us to do, but there has been a hell of a lot of work done by the Water Directorate that's been going for a long time around that space, and it is an issue that is really pressing for everyone.
Yeah, we just advertise 3 positions. I think we got 6 applicants locally, like only 6. I think the highway's getting a lot, but they don't have to have qualifications. So we'll train them up. We'll put them through all the operator courses and the fluoridation courses and the chlorine courses and all that to train them up. But there's just not that many people applying. That's the issue. So the key risks and challenges, power prices. I mean, if they keep on going up, it's going to increase residential bills because we just have to pay for it. If government decides to regulate our price, and like they do with general rates, that could cause some serious issues. I mean, I haven't heard anything about them going to do it, but if they decide to do it. Power failures in the future because there may be some, lack of reliable infrastructure. Chemical shortages because a lot of our chemicals come from overseas. And supply interruption to essential plant materials, like with COVID, it created all sorts of problems.
So going back to that one, Craig, I think, Councillor Fenton's comment around climate's an important one because I think the lessons in it is more about sewage treatment works going under in those big floods. And I know we've had that conversation here, but I think the other really important thing to remember is that our water infrastructure is not covered by disaster funding from the state government. It's owned by us. So if it goes down or something happens to it, then the bill comes to us. Luckily with Lismore, they actually They did fund the new sewage treatment works there, which
Yep.
was totally smashed. So I think that is a really big concern. I suppose the other two things in there that I didn't say, and there's probably more. I mean, looking at that, there's probably there's a bigger conversation about risk that probably could be 2 pages long. But the ones that I'm also thinking about are the people within the Shire who are not on our reticulated water system, and what we do. How do we work with those people and the water carters to get a much better system? Because currently, I know where I'm living that we got 2 tanker loads, and I think it was $420. If you wanted it done quick, and I know in Nambucca they were paying $250 per water. So there's a bit of a discrepancy there between the what people are paying. And I think it is our responsibility to sort of have that conversation. I know at Nambucca they've actually got they're trialling a place where people can come in and actually fill up water. I think they're allowing them 1,000 litres, and I think they're doing it at 70. So that's something that we need to think about. What does that look like? Because I'm assuming that the water carters come, fill up out of our system, and then drive it up the valley and
But it
charge
depends
someone.
what they're putting on top of it.
Yeah. So
Are we charging more than Nambucca? I doubt it. Charging the water
No.
carters.
Well,
Right,
water,
so,
water
yeah.
tank, it probably costs the carter $40 something to fill up. So if they're charging you $475.
Yeah, the
So
rest
that's what
is
I mean. So,
profit.
yeah, so that should be in our risks and whatever it is.
But maybe
What do we
that's
do
not
for
happening
those
as well,
people that
because
haven't got $420 to pay for
Are
water?
people thinking that that's what the Shire charges, like I wouldn't want people to think that that's because Bellingen's ripping us off.
No, look, I think people understand that.
If the water carters are rubbing their hands together as soon as it stops raining.
Well, I suppose,
Basically.
in their defence, when it's raining, they get no work.
Yeah.
But so it is a balance. But it's a question for us, I suppose, and it would be across the JO, I imagine, is what does it look like for water carting? Is there an emergency, a mechanism for us to think about if we go into drought, how we can get water to some people that don't have the money to pay? And like $420 is outrageous, I think. But that maybe is someone taking that opportunity. But we've got to put that in our risk thing. We've got to say, not only is there people on that system, but there's a whole lot of people that live in our valleys and whatever that are on tank water, and what does it look like for them if we're into desperation?
So Councillor King, just to respond to that, there is a conversation that's been had between around the organisation at ELT level about looking at how we better manage that access to potable water for water carters and for the community. To manage that issue, and just really looking at what mechanisms are available to do that. We've been speaking with other local government areas and seeking to understand from their experience, because we've always then got to also manage the capital cost versus the cost of the water and the ability to recharge or recoup those costs. So we're just working through that at the moment and trying to see how we better facilitate that.
Yeah, but I think there's also the risk to council of opening it up to non-regulated water carters.
Not allowed, are we?
No, but the issue is that if we allow someone to come in and fill up a 1,000 litre tank on the back of their ute, and then they take it home and put it in their tank, if it goes wrong and they get sick and councils,
I know Nambucca are trialling it. So and I'm not giving you solutions. I'm giving you this is the risk.
The challenges.
This is the risk and challenges. So that is one that I think we haven't spoken about. The other thing that I would say too is the growth of intensive agriculture is a concern, and we're seeing a massive blow up in Nambucca at the moment, expansion of the blueberry industry. And I think they had a meeting the other day and there was 200 and something people turned up. So there is real concern about what that impact has too. And also, if you're talking about that, then you're talking about the water sharing plan. And the water sharing plan from the government, I think, overestimates the amount of water in the system sometimes. And you don't want to be having yourself where you've got a lot of people competing for water, whether they're tapping into illegal bores or they're building bigger dams. They are concerns and they are risks that we need to. Whether it's our job to actually manage it or not is another thing, but they are risks, whether that's us talking to the state government and saying, hold a second, the stuff going on here that means that it's impacting us, and our role is to ensure that we've got safe and secure water for our residents. So I think there's other things in there that possibly we could talk to. So I'm imagining when we do that review that it will come back to councillors to have another look at that. And I think it'd be great, to tap into, the water directorate, for example, which has got water engineers right throughout the state. So Craig would probably know probably half of them, to come together and talk about those problems, because it certainly was a big concern in September in Sydney from those professionals that we weren't in a fantastic position in terms of drought preparedness. We knew a lot more, but whether we had the answers about what.
So you're talking from a statewide perspective there.
Yeah, for sure.
But just in terms of the list of risks that you identified, do you have any information on strategies that have been developed to mitigate those risks?
Just scroll up, Craig. Scroll, should.
This is going to be available, this presentation.
Yes, yeah, and it's also going to be on the website.
We do have some minor strategies for it, like in terms of power prices, that'll just go into our financial plans. Our power failure, we do have some backup generators, but we may have to get potentially a couple more backup generators just to secure the water supply. We have one at the infiltration well, one at the treatment plant, one at Dorrigo treatment plant. We may need to put a permanent one at the Beals down, but we can supply water if there's a power supply for a while, but it's just not ideal. Chemical shortages, during COVID we did a bit of bartering with other councils, so that's about your main option is working with other councils to swap chemicals. Same as essential plant materials. I mean, even if it's not a shortage, we don't have something, we work with cost. They'll ring us up or we'll ring them up if you got this, you got that. So we sort of have an informal arrangement with local councils.
So councillors, I'll just keep in mind time. We've got 25 minutes before our next external appointment. So, and I think we've still got like 10 slides to get through.
All right, well, just to finish that off though, obviously you have some things in place. I think it would be really useful for councillors and the community to have something a little bit more formalised in ways, strategies that are in place to mitigate.
We have a business continuity plan.
I think that'd be good to share with us.
Yeah, okay.
So solutions to deliver services. I mean, so we've got sound financial management to make sure we do have the money to effectively operate, maintain and renew our assets over a 30-year time period, because it's going to come to a stage in Bellingen Council, like it's sort of starting to creep into the 30-year time frame now, when all our pipes are going to get to a certain age, and it's going to be a massive hit all at once, like tens of millions of dollars to replace pipes. So we need to account for that and make sure we've got those tens of millions of dollars in the bank in the 30 to 40-year time frame when all our infrastructure starts failing. A fully resourced workforce, which just means we need to recruit and get good staff. Comprehensive maintenance program. We do have a comprehensive maintenance program at the moment, but we're looking at improving it with an asset management software. So every bit of plant that needs maintaining or a trouble spot in their reticulation or whatever will be in an asset management system, and that'll automatically email our staff and say, this is you, go and do it. And they can't ignore it because it'll people send it to them until they actually do that maintenance or do that repair. It'll be red light in the system. So that comes with the detailed asset management plan, a program and asset replacements before failure. So with the proper asset management plan, we'll get in and replace and repair something before. Don't want to have something and then have to run around and fix it because it'll cost you a lot more in the long fix it or replace it before it fails. Like
Sorry, I can't hear that speaker, which means the recording probably doesn't either.
Can you hear me now?
Speak up a bit, Craig.
Can you hear me now, Jen?
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, so like, for example, with our sewer pumps, we replace them at 25 years of age, whether they're broken or not, just because that's the expected mechanical life expectancy of the sewer pumps, so we just replace them. So a sound public education on our services, periodic review of service levels, which happens every time we renew our business plans or IWCM. Embrace technological advances. So when something that comes out that can create efficiencies for council or a better way of doing it or a safer way of doing it, we've got to embrace those advances, such as smart metering. Continuously aim to improve efficiencies in power consumption, chemical use and plant and work practices. In our resourcing needs, we've produced a comprehensive business case for the water and sewer business to ensure our teams are adequately resourced. And that is identified, we need 3 additional field work operators when SCV is finalised, and an additional treatment plant operator, because the Urunga treatment plant, the maintenance and operation there is going to increase, especially if we end up installing the water recycling plant. There'll be a lot of additional work there for a treatment plant operator, and we need an operations engineer to stay on top of the maintenance and asset management plans and all that sort of stuff. We've acquired additional vehicles, and we've identified that a 5-tonne excavator, we currently have like a 1.5-tonne excavator that's not big enough to do sewer jobs. So a 5-tonne excavator will improve our efficiency, because at the moment we're just hiring in 5-tonne excavator on a regular basis. And other areas of operations also hiring a 5-tonne excavator. So we purchase that resource and share it across the business units. It'll create some efficiencies. So our revenue sources. So we have a water access charge, and that's your base rate's a 20 mil water meter. That's what your general residential stuff is. But we go right up to, I think, 100 mil water meter at Norco. And your water access charge is based on your meter size. So it's not a straight line. It's like an exponential line. So the bigger the water user you are, the bigger water meter you have, you pay a lot more money. Water consumption charge, Section 64 charges. Section 64 charges are being reviewed at the moment. They're guided by some New South Wales guidelines. You can't just make up developer charges. There's a strict long list of formulas on what your assets are, how old they are, what you plan on doing and what region you're in. They were done in 2007. They were reviewed in 2014, but they never went to council for adoption, which is unfortunate because it's cost us a lot of money. But we're in the middle of the special rate variation at the time, so they didn't want to put increased developer charges up at the same time to the community as a special rate variation. And state and federal grants. We have just received news that for the Surian coastal villages, we put in an expression of interest to the federal government for additional $15 million funding. That was successful, so they've now invited us to submit a formal application for that funding.
So the expression of interest was successful, not a $15 million grant.
No, the expression of interest was successful. And they want to announce that in February, March next year. So cross our fingers that we get that extra $15 million and we can do Raleigh Industrial Estate,
Amazing.
Repton and the water recycling plant.
So a 2-step process. So we've made the first gateway, and then we'll see how we go with the actual application.
So Craig, can I just go back before we move on? You did put up some stuff up there that was in terms of resourcing and spoke about, you know, that infrastructure replacement, which was another thing that came up. How are we sitting for that? You know, in terms of where that sits in our budget. It might be not for Craig, actually. It might be. So how's that looking for us in terms of that replacement capacity in our budget?
In terms of plant and equipment?
Well, yeah, and replacing the pipe work, you know, that amount of work, the works that are involved in that, etc.
Yeah.
How are we sitting for that? Because I understand, and that's not unique to Bellingen. I'm sure that is everywhere. That is a big issue for people. And I suppose it also then goes to our capacity with our sewer and treatment works as well.
So I guess the smaller plant and equipment stuff, that's just being dealt with on a day-to-day basis. There's no real concerns around that. With regards to that longer term stuff, what we need to do, it's beyond the 10-year time horizon of the long-term financial plan at this point in time. So one of the things that we need to do is have a look at when the peaks are going to occur, whether that's in 15, 20, 25 years time, and then look to, I guess, optimise our capital replacement programs to probably spread that out. So one of the things I've done in previous councils where I've worked in, even though the majority of it mightn't have a replacement of 20 years time, you may bring some of that forward, say to year 13, so that the actual peak is not as great, which allows the water scheme to actually build that in over that sort of 15-year time. You may do a bit of work on assessing some of those and see whether they can be pushed out a little bit, so that it's more of a hump in the road rather than a hill. So it's beyond the 10-year time frame for the long-term financial plan, but you'll start to see that coming in the next sort of 5 to 10 years being built into the program.
So, sound strategic decisions. We have a whole suite of documents. So, integrated water cycle management plan, financial plan, and drinking water management system, drought management plans. How much time have you got?
You've got about 15 minutes.
15 minutes, right. So, our strategic business plan, that was developed in 2012. And it's basically, its mission statement is the first 2 lines. So to have cost-effective water supply and sewage services to Bellingen Shire, which meets the levels of service to which customers have agreed and to which they are prepared to pay and which satisfies all statutory requirements. Services provided equitably in a commercial manner, taking into account the values of the broader community. The service will be environmentally sensitive, promote ecological sustainability within the area of operations and protect public health. That document comes out of the IWCN, but it more looks at the business planning for council, like the operational environment, the levels of service delivery. There's a customer service plan, how we do things for our environmental protection and sustainable development. It guides the asset management plan. The asset management plan is a separate documentation. It has a workforce plan. On the same side. The financial plan was developed in 2015. They set out the long-term 30-year price pass that council needs to levy on its customers to fund recurrent costs and capital investment. And it develops and identifies a typical residential build. It was all based on some state government software called FinMod, which you plug. It's like it was an old back-end spreadsheet bit of software. That software doesn't seem to work on modern computers anymore, so it's a bit hard to use, but we'll update our financial plan and hopefully find some new software after the business plan's been reviewed. And then we should really update the financial plan along with our capital works program every 12 months. Our drought management plan was developed in 2013. I mean, the objectives are, to outline the recent drought performance, develop drought management process, and develop an emergency response system. So if there is a bad drought or we're running low on water, this is the document we turn to. So, I mean, it has emergency desalination in this, but it hasn't been updated for the latest design of the latest desalination we did in 2019. So that document will need to be updated as well.
And is there a plan to do that?
Yep. I've got a slide with a list of the dates for updates.
Right.
The demand management plan, that was developed in 2012. Not much has changed there. It's just basically to manage the demand on our water supply so we don't run short of water. And a lot of the stuff involved in that is community education, our water resilience officer, but smart metering to detect leaks. And if we are in a high demand period or a drought period, we go out and do active leak detection. We did a series of active leak detection 8 months ago. So they went around to all our mains. So we've repaired all the leaks they found, and they also found leaks in all the customers' houses. So sending letters out to the customers so they can repair all their leaks. So it'll reduce their bills and it'll reduce demand on our water supply. We've also set up some district metering areas. North Bellingen is going to become one, Yellow Rocks one, Newry Islands one, where we've got a pipe that just enters one area. We can meter it and reduce pressure. We've reduced pressure to those two areas. We can reduce pressure to North Bellingen if we want. We've got a pressure reduction valve in Marston. So the lower the water pressure, we want to keep it about 50 metres head, and then sometimes in some areas can get up to 80 or 90 metres head, which just means they use more water and you get more mains breaks and leaks. So we want to minimise our water pressure. Our development servicing plan, I've already talked about that. That's in review. Soon as we get the strategy, or at least agree on what options we want in our integrated water cycle management strategy, we'll be doing this under the same period. So we have a grant funding to do the first cut of the developer servicing plan. Once that's done, then we'll finish the lot, because it needs to be adopted by council as soon as possible, because we are losing money in developments. A drinking water management system. That's just a document that we use to operate our treatment plan and reticulation network, just to ensure it complies with the New South Public Health Act of 2010, the health regulations of 2012. It's reviewed annually as part of our licence conditions. Its main purpose is to install series of barriers, critical control points, such as chlorine, fluoride and turbidity levels. So the chlorine is always at the optimum level, so there's no pathogens getting into our water supply, or we're not poisoning people with high chlorine. Fluoride, there's no issues with low fluoride, but you don't want high fluoride, so we're constantly monitoring that. And turbidity levels are constantly monitored, because if you get high turbidity coming through in your water supply, it can affect your chlorination and pathogens. So this is when we're going to review our strategic plans. The IWCM strategy we hope to complete in May 2024. The business plan updated in March 2025. The financial plan in June 2025. Developing servicing plan hopefully by June 2024. The drinking water management system, that's reviewed annually. The drought management plan 2025 and demand management plan 2026. So implementing sound pricing and financial management. As part of best practice management, we're required to have a financial plan for the water and wastewater services, so we have to do it. The plan is based on the needs identified in the 30-year capital works program, the ISWCM, developer servicing plan, operational maintenance costs. So it takes a holistic view of every cost we have in a 30-year planning horizon and ensures we have adequate income coming in to cover all those costs. And our typical residential bill is based on recovering those costs, but also that we're not recovering too much costs. Because they do in the financial plan, they model what's coming in. If your bill's too high for 30 years, they'll actually tell you, you could reduce your typical residential bill a little bit here, or it needs to go up. So it can go both ways. So promoting the IWCM. So we'll have a public consultation phase. The last IWCM we had community meetings in Dorrigo, Bellingen and Urunga. So we'll be doing that again and advertising it.
Were they well attended?
No. We had, I think it was only the librarians at the day.
Okay.
Listened to the presentation. In Urunga, I think we had 5 people. I think Bellingen had about 4 people.
How many, sorry?
4.
Yeah.
So it'll be on council's website. We'll do a social media post of it. We've got a council's water resilience officer who will promote it as well. And we're a member of the School Water Wise program, so I'll promote it through that as well. Any questions? Any further questions?
Can we just circle back to the water carting thing?
Oh, yeah.
Are there other councils who provide that service themselves in areas where there may not be water carters?
I would imagine that there would be some councils that do it. However, we do have quite a good supply of water carters. I think we've got 12 that are on the books.
Okay.
So it's not, I think it's not until people really start needing water that they then get really busy, as we saw in the end of September. So we're working with the water carters, and as I advised council in my update last week, we've sent them all letters to make sure that we have our inspections up to date and that type of thing. Now that there's been a bit of rain and the demand isn't as high as it was, now's the time to get all those ducks in a row to make sure that we're all compliant. And if they're registered with an adjoining local authority, we're happy to take that registration and just have the application come in so that they are registered.
So they have to submit a DA?
No,
Council, is that
It's
right?
a Section 68
Section
approval.
68.
Okay. So are they only regulated by council, or is there something like New South Wales Food Authority that does some regulation?
so
to
this,
make sure
my
the
understanding
tanks
is
are
the
all,
Section
you know,
68 application means that they need to comply with the food safety standards with regards to the transportation of potable water.
So our environmental health officer will have a look at it and certify that they believe that's a suitable vessel, for want of a better term, to be able to transport water safely from there to you, and therefore it's still a consumable
Do they
product.
have testing or anything on their tanks? Like, you know, like I'm just coming from a dairy farm point of view where we had to have, you know, the vats and everything tested all the time to make sure there was no bacteria or anything in them. Do they have that in their water tanks? Any testing regimes?
No.
Councillor Fenton.
Yeah, I'm interested in the panel that met, the community panel. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the term. If anyone can help me.
Yeah, deliberative panel.
Deliberative, thank you. The deliberative panel was about water security, wasn't it? Specifically, that just happened in the last few years.
That's correct.
Yeah, and are they part of that ongoing? Was there an opportunity to express ongoing involvement in water, and has that consultation been directed to them specifically?
Not at this point in time, Councillor Fenton, because we're just not at that public consultation phase. I guess we can give consideration to the membership of that sort of deliberative panel process, which then resulted in a sort of a survey that was undertaken with our community. And you may recall when we're talking about the water supply options, we provided some commentary back to council. I think there's been a couple of reports in that regard to say that's what came out of that process. So you might recall the conversation about, we talked about with water supply options. Through that process, they weren't particularly supportive of a pipes connected supply, or they weren't supportive of bringing water from other areas outside our LGA. There was a big focus on water security, about utilising tanks, maybe off-stream storage, maybe aquifer recharge.
So I guess what it's actually saying there is the information that we used as part of the process with the writing of the IWCM as it is at the moment. Thank you very much, councillors, for your participation. Thank you to anyone in the community that's watched this far, and appreciate the time that you've given to have this discussion today. So on that note,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.